Comment about what Krein says about creating our own reality and that we have the ability to heal ourselves.
The fact is this: we have now just this last year and a half started showing experiments in physics that would indicate that the human consciousness is actually a field that can be measured. We now understand and know that we can change matter. Physicists have known this for a long time, even in some of the experiments they do where they have to leave the room, or what they wish to have happen will actually bias the experiment as it happens. Even the placebo experiments in chemistry, when we have human consciousness getting in the way of a fair experiment with chemistry. I can point to a website that actually quotes the physicist as says, we understand that human consciousness is palatable and measurable and real. So I bring that to the answer first before I answer the spiritual one. If this is true and science is seeing it, it fits like this in what Krein has been saying. You have the ability through your intent and your thoughts to literally change your cellular structure. It starts to fit in with the master's ability to do the very same thing with other people and themselves. We call these miracles, not to take a miracle away from God, but what if it was partly the human and the divinity in the human that was part of that engine? All of these things we read about in the Bible and what the masters were able to do over history and in all kinds of scripture all over the earth that walked the planet. What if it had to do with this engine that we're now just starting to understand? People come into the earth hoping their body will do the right thing. You live in your head. You and I, all our senses are up here. And boy, we hope we don't get cancer and that the cell works and the heart doesn't fail. And now we're starting to understand that we are one system. An article that we bring forward now, recently in Time magazine, where surgeons are starting to recommend meditation, which of course is a state of mind because it helps the blood flow during surgery. So now you're starting to have MDs understand and see the value of something as spooky and woo-woo, unproven as meditation in advance and post of surgery. They're not taking as many drugs, they don't need as much pain medication. All of these kinds of things are starting to occur. It fits right in what Krein has said. You want to change your molecular structure? You want to how about this one? How about changing the predispositions of your family inheritance? Are you going to get that Alzheimer's that Dad had? Are you going to get the cancer your sister did? These kinds of things that genealogy is now starting to pick it out of your own genome and say, well, we're going to tell you what your predispositions are. Even with an unborn child, it sounds like a contract. Krein is even addressing that, saying this is rewritable.
Krein has given many predictions over the years. I think the favorite one in book one was the weather shifts that we're seeing right now. That's 21 years ago. He called it, and here it is. But of course that wasn't that hard because this is a weather cycle that often happens on the planet. But what we had done, according to Krein, is advance it. We had brought it sooner. Now that's only possible if we've sped up time, and we have. As I look at the audience, looking at this video right now, I ask you, haven't you felt the speed up of time? We all feel it. We all feel it. So one of the prophecies of Krein, of course, is the weather shift, and we're there. But he also loves to talk about physics, and I won't get elaborate, but he talked about the ability of us being able to change mass, that is to say, to tune it, to make things float in the air, not by creating or inventing anti-gravity, but actually tuning mass. So if you could take an object, no matter how heavy it was, and tune its mass, you could make it light. You might even be able to make it float. You might even be able to make it reverse. Instead of wanting to go down, it'll go up. This is exactly what Nikola Tesla did, and it's proven in his laboratories. He had things take off the bench, they say, and hit the ceiling and make marks all over it. He discovered it. He wasn't able to refine it. He didn't have computers, didn't have any of the instruments we do now. Didn't have the elegance of the science we do now, the instruments. But we do now. I always wondered, will we ever be able to do it? I'd love to have that validation, and then I got it. 2005, I got a letter from a physicist. He said that's exactly what they had discovered on a very small scale. I don't know where it's gone from there, but he says they were able to actually make mass heavier. Now, of course, everyone wants to make it lighter, so they have a little work to do. So these are the kinds of things that Krein has talked about. He talked about the magnetic shift of the planet, that is to say that the grid of the planet, the North and the South Pole, would move. Only a few degrees, but they would move. So instead of them aligning where they always had been, there would be a shift like that. We got that. We even had it reported from our news services and our science services very profoundly that it had moved more in the last 10 years than it had in the last 100. So this is one of the premises of cryon, talking about the magnetics of the planet moving. This has to do also with the esoterics of the planet. It may even have to do with the Kundalini that moved. I'm not sure. But it moved, just like cryon said it would. So we've had those validations. And then finally, some of my favorite are what have just happened in the United States. I think the predictions 1 year in advance of our recession, he said that the largest corporations in America would fall over, and they have, and they did, including our car companies, which we cherish, and we never thought that would happen, and it did. Also, he talked about the banking system falling over, and he said one of the largest financial systems in America would fall. The first one, it would be insurance. They have the most money, he said. They do. And that's the first thing that went, AIG Insurance. So these are the validations that we continue to see from cryon. I trust them. And then let me just tell you something as I close here. It's not hard, cryon says, to give these predictions. It's like we were in a ship. And the ship represents the energy of humanity. And we're on a sea of change. As long as we're steering in a certain direction, cryon can tell us what's going to happen, because those are the things in front of our ship. And these are the potentials we create as we change the consciousness of the planet. It's not hard then to see these things coming. It's always startling when cryon talks about them, because I didn't know they were in front of the ship. But according to cryon, that it's not that hard. In other words, he's simply reporting what we're doing. Esoterically, what we're doing. Consciously, perhaps not. I like it. Altogether, there is a tremendous shift going on the planet. It is a positive shift. I invite you to feel it with me. After all these years, I still see it. After all these years, I still count on the one thing cryon said. We are headed for the potential, the possibility. Odd as it may sound, with everything around us as it is, someday. For 21 years, cryon has been channeling. There's a lot of physics, a lot of world events. He talks about magnetics. But one of the most favorite things he has ever discussed has been about healing. That is, for the human being to heal their own body in ways that they never thought they could. This message is old. This message, I believe, the masters gave us. And now we're having modern science start to agree. There are actually studies of DNA that show that 90% of DNA doesn't seem to do anything at all. Through countless experiments, they're now realizing that DNA has an interdimensional field to it. It's far more than we think. They also are now believing that the genes of the human body, over 23,000 of them, are created by only 3% of DNA. What does the rest do? This is the subject of cryon's latest book, The 12 Layers of DNA. What we teach, and what some are teaching now who are very profoundly metaphysical and yet scientific, even some MDs, is that 90% of DNA is information. It's information about what should be in the stem cells of the body. That is to say, the perfect imprint of what the body should be, what it should act like, what it should do. Can we access them? And the answer is yes. We believe a lot of the miracles we saw that were reported, for instance, that the masters did, were actually individual human beings healing themselves through this process. So there is a healing subject that cryon has told us about 21 years ago, that we can heal our own bodies. Now, 21 years later, he's actually giving the specifics, how it works. In one channel, he has even talked about what happens when the cells divide, how they speak to each other, how they look at one another and say, shall I make the imprint the same as it used to be, or shall I make it different? We haven't known any difference till this point of how to address the division process. And now cryon is starting to say this is the answer. If we can write the information, for instance, in our body and change it through a process of our own divinity, every time the cell divides, it's not going to make a deformed part. It's going to make a new one that's better. It's not going to have a weak immune system. It's going to make a new one that's stronger. We believe this. Science has reported for a long time that the human brain can actually think its way to health. We've had things happen like spontaneous remission, where cancers leave a body instantly for no seeming reason, where virulent diseases like AIDS will disappear. We don't know why. And this is what Krein is saying. This is why. Because the human being has taken it upon himself to believe enough, to change the information. And then when the cells start to divide, they create a more perfect human being. We rejuvenate our bodies. Every organ in the body, including the skin, is rejuvenated all of the time. So every time it rejuvenates, there is a potential possibility of changing the imprint. This is healing at its best. Yes, it sounds a lot more technical now than when Krein started, but it still has to do with thinking. Can you think your way to health? Doctors believe you can. It's metaphysical, it's spiritual, and there's a lot here that hasn't changed at all about that. This message has been the same since we started. One of the questions that I was asked is, what is it that has changed through the years? 21 years of you channeling Krein, and I have the answer, and you might find it odd, and that is the people have changed. The message has not. What we are actually seeing is the energy on Earth starting to shift. Look around you. Look at what your country has gone through. Look at it 100 years ago. You know, we are now in a place where things have changed dramatically, and we're not doing the same things, are we? We are not creating dictator after dictator after dictator. No, we've turned a corner. There's a paradigm shift. We have it in the United States as well. We can feel it. Things are not going to revert to the way they were. You might say this is then like the healing of the body, except it's the healing of human consciousness.